Now, being able to prusik is an important skill that every advanced canyoner needs to have. Prusiking doesn't mean necessarily ascending large lengths of rope. Prusiks can be used to do simple things to get yourself out of trouble, like if your descender is jammed, just being able to take the weight off it by standing on a foot prusik or moving back up a few 100 millimeters to solve a problem can quite easily be achieved with a couple of prusik knots. So what we're going to look at now is how to prusik using prusik cords. At the very least you'll need a waist prusik, which I've set in my case to about this long, from my thumb to halfway between my elbow and my shoulder. And you'll need a foot prusik. This one here I've set so that if I stand in the loop it comes to about my belly button. What I'm also going to set up is a second waist prusik, which is a little bit longer than the first. And I'll explain the reason for having a second waist prusik when we get into it in a minute. Now, the basic way of doing a prusik is to tie a prusik knot around the rope. Now, there are several types of prusik knots. I'm just going to show you the standard prusik knot, which is generally the most reliable when you're using it for ascent. To tie the prusik knot, you set the cord so that the knot is not completely at the end but near the end. Open up the other side and wrap it around 3 times. Now, you want to do this at least 3 times. In certain circumstances you might want to go more and add another loop, and you might do that if the size of your rope is very thin compared to your prusik cord and you have trouble getting it to bite. When you've tied the prusik cord, it should look nice and neat like that. If it's not neat, if it's not crossed over, then it's not going to work properly. Now, you'll notice that this rope is very supple and easy to tie. As I mentioned in my other video, if your cord is too stiff, it can be quite difficult to get it to tighten down. You can still do it, but it's worth trying to find some nice prusik cord that ties easily like that. Now, that's going to be my waist prusik. My second prusik will be my foot prusik, so again I position the knot towards one end. This can be a little bit trickier to tie because of the length, but basically the same principle. You thread it through 3 times. Trying to keep it as neat as you can. And there we go. Dress it nicely, and there we are, like the other one, nice and straight and even. So the way prusik knots work is that when you load them, they grab onto the rope. After you put weight on it, they tend to be done up quite tight. To make them move upwards as you ascend the rope, you may have to flip them open a little bit like that and move them up. So what I'm going to do first is demonstrate ascending just using these 2 prusik knots. In this case, the waist prusik knot is really going to be taking all my weight. The foot prusik knot I'm going to use to move upwards. Now I'm going to attach my waist prusik to my waist using a locking carabiner. As I start off from the ground, I'm going to want to get that up as high as I can, and then I'm going to want to sit in it. And you can see that's taking my weight. I'll move my foot prusik loop up almost to the waist prusik. I'll get my foot into my prusik loop. I'll stand on that, and when I stand on it, keeping my leg as vertical as I can push the waist prusik up, then sit back down on it again. move upwards, I have to release my foot prusik, as I mentioned, give it a bit of a twist, slide it up, stand in again, up I go, release my waist prusik, push it up, and rinse and repeat. Now, the reason you might want to have a second waist prusik is that you'll notice that this is the only thing connecting me to the rope. Now, if I'm just climbing up several meters, this is generally not too much of an issue, but if I want to ascend 50 meters, I probably want to do something a little bit better than this to make sure I don't have a failure and fall off. So there's a couple of ways of dealing with this. One way is to periodically set up a catastrophe knot. So a catastrophe knot is just a knot that you tie yourself to the rope to periodically. If there's a failure, the catastrophe knot will catch you. The best way to do that, I found, is to tie a clove hitch, hook this into your harness, and every few meters or so you can pull the rope through the clove hitch and tighten the knot up. And if this was to fail, you'll end up being caught by your catastrophe knot. Maybe not terribly elegant, but it's better than falling to the bottom of the rope. Now, an alternative to this is to use a second waist prusik, which I'll demonstrate in a moment. So if you want to add a second waist prusik to the mix, we just get a slightly longer waist prusik. In this case, it's a bit past my shoulder. I attach it above my shorter waist prusik in the same manner. And clip this to a second carabiner. You should clip it to the same carabiner as your other waist prusik, because otherwise if you need to remove something, you might find it's weighted and you can't undo it. Now the principle here is when I move up, I can push both prusiks up as I move up the rope, and now I'm connected to 2 points. So if one of these prusiks was to fail, the other one would catch me. Now this is slightly more awkward because you've got a bit more work to do, but it is safer. And it also means that if you come up to a sharp edge and you have trouble getting your waist prusik up over that sharp edge, you can actually just disconnect your longer one, reconnect it above the sharp edge, and then use that to get yourself up and over. So I'll just demonstrate how this works. I'm sitting on both my waist prusiks. I stand up on my foot prusik. I can push both of these up the top one up away, then I can sit on them. And then repeat. And that's all there is to it. Now, one thing you might want to learn how to do is to down prusik. It's really very similar. You just lower your foot prusik, stand on the foot prusik, release your waist prusiks, slide them down, transfer your weight to your waist prusiks, lower your foot prusik, and repeat. I don't know if you're getting dizzy, but and there you go. Now a couple of other words of caution. When you're prusiking with knots like this, you should be doing this in a slow and methodical manner. And one thing you should avoid trying to do is pull yourself up with the knots. If you pull yourself up with the knot, you might end up releasing the prusik and you might end up releasing a second prusik, and then you might end up sliding down the rope. So this is best done in a careful, controlled manner. Be careful not to pull on the prusik knots. Just one other point that's worth mentioning. This system works quite fine on double ropes in addition to single ropes.